A man desperately ill. Only his best friend can save him. But he comes too late. Or does he?
The raising of Lazarus is Jesus' greatest miracle.
This is really kick-starting the events that are going to lead to his own death.
Is not, I give the resurrection, but I am the resurrection.
A centuries-old tradition believes Lazarus came to Cyprus.
This is the tomb of St. Lazarus.
So who is Lazarus? Could these be his bones? As science puts the miracle under the microscope, the hunt begins. Larnaca, the island of Cyprus. Christianity dates back to 45 AD here, roughly a decade after the crucifixion. But the Basilica in Larnaca maintains an ancient tradition that puts Cyprus at the heart of the Jesus story. Worshippers here venerate the relics held to be evidence of Jesus' greatest miracle. The raising of Lazarus. In the Bible, Lazarus has an exclusive title.
We are introduced to the character of Lazarus in the Gospel of John. What we are told about him is unique. He is the one whom Jesus loved.
Lazarus, come out.
And he is famous for his part in the ultimate miracle of Jesus' mission.
The raising of Lazarus is one of the most lengthy narratives anywhere in the Gospels. Yet the person at its center, Lazarus, never actually speaks. He is the enigma at the heart of the story.
In 1972, workers repairing the basilica in Larnaca made a startling discovery.
There's a sarcophagus that contains bones inside.
Written on the side in Greek are the words, "Friend of Jesus."
They announced to the world that these are the bones of none other than Lazarus.
Could this be the final resting place of the man known in the Bible as Jesus' beloved friend? Lazarus may have been silent in the Bible, but it tells us where he's from, Bethany.
This place is Al-Azariah. It's here in the West Bank, just behind the Mount of Olives, and it's the traditional site of Bethany, the place associated with the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, where Jesus would stay when he was in Jerusalem.
According to the Gospels, Jesus is a regular visitor to Bethany.
Jesus, you're here. Come and sit. You must be tired.
Jesus has a very special bond with Martha and Mary. It's a very intimate relationship. He's going to visit people that he trusts, and people that trust him too.
Martha and Mary are sort of like yin and yang, like many sisters, one introspective, the other outgoing. I think they comprise kind of the totality of ways of interacting with Jesus.
So Mary plays the passive role where she sits at Jesus' feet and listens. And Martha plays the active role, ministering to people who come through in the household to hear Jesus.
Lord, do you not care that my sisters left me to serve alone?
Instead of getting in her own sister's face, she gets in Jesus' face and says, "You tell her." And Jesus' response is unexpected.
Martha, You are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.
The story is about priorities. Even a woman has a right to prioritize learning from me over preparing a meal.
In John's Gospel, Martha and Mary have a brother.
Lazarus!
We don't know too much about Lazarus, but there are some clues in the Gospels. Lazarus and Jesus were very close. He is described as his friend, he whom he loved. Jesus may have had roots and family in Judea, in Jerusalem, and maybe even in Bethany. So Lazarus could have had a friendship that long predated Jesus' public ministry.
Early Christians didn't just invent people out of thin air the way a Hollywood biopic would today. The fact that Lazarus and his siblings, Mary and Martha, are all mentioned shows that they were fairly prominent figures in the early Christian movement. The relationship between Jesus and Lazarus is of a completely different order than the relationship he has with anyone else. He loves him.
When Lazarus falls sick, it's a love that will be tested to the limit. In the final weeks of his mission, Jesus is a wanted man. Outlawed by the temple authorities, he and his disciples retreat from Jerusalem to seek safety beyond the River Jordan. Meanwhile, in Bethany, Lazarus, the brother of Martha and Mary, is sick.
We come to the story in John 11 about Mary and Martha and Lazarus in the middle of things. Something has gone tragically wrong, and Lazarus is at death's door.
Most people who got sick would know that they were going to die. It aren't treatments that are going to ease your suffering at the end of life. Knowing that you're going to die of a disease is a terrifying prospect.
For Mary and Martha, only a miracle can save their brother.
Is it surprising that when we meet Lazarus, he is defined by his sickness? It shouldn't be. All throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus as a healer.
Mary and Martha send out an urgent communique to Jesus. The one whom you love is desperately ill. Get yourself down here as quickly as you can possibly do it. You might be able to prevent this.
Jesus is far from Bethany, beyond the Jordan River.
It does seem that Mary and Martha know where Jesus and the disciples are and how to get in contact with them.
When Mary and Martha send word to Jesus that their brother is ill, they don't call him Lazarus of Bethany or Lazarus our brother. They call him in the Greek hon philes, he whom you love. It's a very beautiful indication of the intense and affectionate relationship that Jesus and Lazarus had.
John, your friend is sick.
When Jesus receives the message, he seems to be not immediately motivated to do something about it.
Lazarus' sickness will not end in death.
In fact, he says to his disciples, we're going to stay here a little bit longer. And his disciples go, why aren't we moving? It's an urgent thing. He's going to die.
Instead, he waits. You begin to wonder, was his delay hesitation? Was it him working through his emotions? Or was it something greater than that?
For Mary and Martha and Lazarus to know that Jesus, who had healed people before, was delaying in coming must have been torture to them.
One of the things that makes Lazarus's predicament especially hard is not just that he's dying, but that he's going to leave behind him two unmarried sisters. They're going to be vulnerable. It's a difficult and daunting prospect, not just for him, but for everyone.
He helped others. Why couldn't he help Lazarus is the question asked about him, right? And so I think Jesus has mixed emotions about this. He's not going to respond to the will of a human being. He's going to wait from the word from on high before he does something.
But maybe a sign in John's gospel that Jesus has control over the situation. If he wants to wait, he will wait. He's God.
As Lazarus dies, Mary and Martha must have experienced that deep grief of death, but also the grief of it could have been different. Knowing that there is one in their lives who could have healed him and not allowed him to die.
It must have been painful to delay and wait for God's answer in prayer that this was the time to do this.
Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him.
Lord, if he's fallen asleep, but he'll be all right.
Lazarus is dead.
Jesus has a real sense of destiny in John's Gospel. There's no way that he is going to allow even the most important requests from his close friends to interfere with the destiny, with that path that God set before him.
Finally, Jesus heads to Bethany and the home of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha.
He knows that this could lead him into trouble, into persecution, and a path that will ultimately lead to the cross.
The stage is set for Jesus' greatest miracle. El Azariah, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, derived from the Greek Lazarian. It means the place of Lazarus, and it's believed to be the site where Jesus raised his friend from the dead.
The tradition tying Lazarus to this spot is strong. And it's not only a Christian tradition, the Muslim faith also venerates Lazarus as having been here on this place.
There is a record of worship here since the 4th century. Today, the tomb believed to be that of Lazarus is 33 feet underground.
This chamber is actually built at a much later date after Jesus, but it's built over this small place here, which is actually carved out of the bedrock. This is understood by tradition to be the tomb of Lazarus.
In keeping with tradition, Martha and Mary prepare their brother for burial.
It must have been a desolate moment. They knew he was dead. They knew that there was no life left in him. it was the custom, but you bind someone's face knowing that there is no longer any breath or possibility. And so it was the end for their brother.
He's been dead for over 3 days. And that's a very significant point indeed, because many early Jews who did believe in an afterlife believed that once somebody has been dead for 3 days, there's no hope of reviving them. There's no hope of them coming back from the dead.
The sisters are still grieving when Martha gets word. Jesus has come.
Martha rushes out right away, almost impulsively, in keeping with this assertive figure that she is. She goes out and tells him what had happened. It tells him that he's too late and expresses her sorrow.
If you had been here, my brother would not have died.
If you had just been here, you might have spared Lazarus dying. And there's a lot of poignancy and urgency to this story.
But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him.
Your brother will rise again.
I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day.
She has some understanding or some belief in the resurrection, as many of the Jews of the first century had, and she says, well, I understand that he will rise again in the last day. But that's not what Jesus is talking about.
I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die.
Jesus reminds her of things possibly that they had spoken in her own home. That he is the resurrection and the life.
Do you believe this?
I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God.
So even though somebody dies, I can bring them back after that as well. And so it's a reassurance for now, but it's also a reassurance for later.
Where's Mary?
There's a nice detail here where it says, Martha goes back into the house and she speaks to her sister quietly. She speaks to her quietly, of course, because it's a house in mourning.
The teacher's here. And he's calling for you.
The Greek term didaskalos simply means teacher, and this is what Martha calls Jesus. This reflects true belief in Jesus, who he is. He's certainly a teacher, but inadequate belief. He's much more than just a teacher. He's actually a person who can raise the dead.
Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
She has a deeper faith in this Jesus. And she was able to look beyond the friendship and reflect on the words that he may have spoken to her. And she trusted that he can do something about the situation.
When Martha confronts Jesus with her question, "Where were you?" Jesus responds as a teacher. When Mary confronts Jesus with the same question, Jesus' response is much more emotional. He weeps. One of the shortest verses in the gospel is Jesus began to weep. It's very powerful to hear because it reminds us of Jesus' humanity.
This stands out because Jesus does not portray a lot of emotion in many other times. So why here? Why here is he so troubled? It brings us to that issue of how close of a friend this Lazarus was, and perhaps that Jesus is doubting, just for a moment, that this is God's will.
I think there's no question that it reflects the deep and profound friendship he had with this family.
Where have you laid the body?
There's also this very deep frustration that even as long as he has been with them, they still don't understand him, and they still don't understand what he's capable of doing.
Jesus has shown his humanity. Now he will prove his divinity.
Lazarus!
And set the course for his own death and resurrection. Bethany, location in John's Gospel for the ultimate miracle of Jesus' mission. One that puts his friend Lazarus at the heart of the Passion narrative.
Jesus goes to Lazarus' tomb, and this is on a pilgrim route to Jerusalem at a time very close to Passover. So there are plenty of people around. Will he do something dramatic? Is something exciting going to happen? Is Lazarus going to be raised from the dead?
What we're dealing with here in John 11 is that he realizes if he raises somebody from the dead right in the shadow of Jerusalem and a stone's throw from the temple in Jerusalem, this, of course, will set in motion what he said must happen to him. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be killed, and on the third day rise.
Take away the stone.
But Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days.
Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?
He lets others roll the stone back. And then he prays this remarkable, remarkable prayer.
Father, I thank you that you have heard me.
He says, I know I can do this, but so they will know what can be done through the only begotten Son of the Father. Let's do this for your glory.
Lazarus, come out.
The tomb is open. Nobody's quite sure what's going to happen. There are flies. It's hot. This person's been dead for 4 days. It must have been very frightening.
Lazarus! Come out!
What must have been the emotions on that particular occasion? Mary and Martha are exhilarated and maybe a little bit ashamed that they weren't anticipating Jesus doing this on the spot, but there it was.
Jesus identifies himself as the Good Shepherd, someone who knows his sheep by name and to whom then the sheep respond. Lazarus knows the voice of his shepherd, and it allows him to have life.
Let him go.
I love Jesus' word, unbind him and let him go. It's a sign of God calling us to freedom.
It's a fascinating question to ask if the resurrection of Lazarus is the greatest miracle in the ministry of Jesus. It certainly would be the most spectacular, the most compelling, the one that violates our view of reality most powerfully.
I believe that Jesus resurrected Lazarus out of compassion and mercy towards this beloved family, this beloved friend. I also believe that Jesus knows that it is time. It is time for him to show the fullness of God within him, even if it costs him his life.
There's a crescendo of the miraculous because it foreshadows the end of the Passion narrative, where Jesus himself will be raised from the dead, the one who is the resurrection.
In some ways, this is really Jesus' finest moment. He resurrected someone from the dead. At the same time, he has alerted the authorities to his presence. By resurrecting Lazarus, Jesus is essentially setting in motion the events that will lead to his own death.
In the week before Passover, the raising of Jesus' beloved friend draws pilgrims eager to witness the living miracle.
You would think the moment when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, he would end all the controversy. That everyone who has been waiting for a Messiah would finally run to Jesus and say, "You are the one, you are the Christ, you're the Son of God, you're the Messiah." But that's not what happens.
There are going to be spies trying to figure out who exactly is he, what are his aims, what exactly are his powers. They want to know because their power in Jerusalem is threatened.
Caiaphas, the high priest, has already set his sights on Jesus.
The raising of Lazarus was one of the tipping points that led to the Jewish officials saying, "We really do have to get rid of this guy."
Bethany, the week before Passover, at the house of Jesus' beloved friends, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary.
It was at their home that Jesus prepared himself for this final trip into Jerusalem, because these were individuals and relationships that he could trust, especially with all of the talk of the plots against his life.
After Lazarus was resurrected, he was a hunted man by the priestly aristocracy. They wanted to kill him to destroy the evidence of Jesus' power. Go.
Jesus heads to Jerusalem, where he will face betrayal, his trial, and crucifixion.
The raising of Lazarus drew crowds to Jesus, and one might imagine that Lazarus might have feared for his own life.
Mary! Mary!
So now Lazarus is a refugee, with all the challenges that building a new life has.
Then Lazarus disappears from the Bible. Is it possible he came here, to Cyprus?
Cyprus seems to have been a safe haven for Christians who were fleeing the persecution of the Jewish authorities in the Holy Land.
Oxford University archaeologist George Kazan is in Cyprus to test the relics believed to be those of Lazarus.
Cyprus is very close to the Holy Land. There was an established Jewish community here already. Trade winds blow straight up from the south and take you right here by ship very quickly.
Lazarus drops out of the New Testament after the end of the Gospel of John, but there are some much later traditions, including one from the 8th century in which Lazarus ended up in Cyprus, being appointed a bishop there.
It's a tradition maintained by the present Bishop of Larnaca.
St. Lazarus left Jerusalem,
Yes.
and he came to Larnaca. He was preaching the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ when St. Paul and St. Barnabas came to Cyprus, and they ordained him the first bishop of Larnaca.
The Larnaca tradition talks about how he was invested with power by Barnabas and Paul to act as bishop of Larnaca. Now that trip of Paul and Barnabas is documented in the book of Acts.
There is a tradition saying that he was a martyr. The tradition was to build the churches in the place that a saint was killed or suffered for Christ, our Lord.
Archaeology reveals there has been a church on this site since the 5th century.
Sometime around the 7th century, the church seems to have been destroyed. It either was through the Arab invasion of Cyprus, which took place in that year, or it may have been due to some earthquakes that we know took place at that time.
Lazarus disappears until late in the 9th century, when a rumor spreads through the Christian world. His relics have been discovered. And in 901, Byzantine knights come to Cyprus in search of the bones of Jesus' beloved friend.
The Emperor of Constantinople sends his agents to the island of Cyprus. They enter the large church there dedicated to St. Lazarus, and they proceed to go down into the crypt where they find the remnants of the saint. They then make their way back to Constantinople.
In exchange for the relics, one theory holds that the emperor built the vast three-domed basilica, the Church of St. Lazarus that stands here today.
As far as we know, they stayed in Constantinople till the Latin sack of the city by the Crusaders and by the Turks. The bones kind of grow off the grid. They could have been taken away in tow by Crusaders, or they could have stayed in the city. What's sure is that they don't seem to be there today.
The bones of Lazarus vanish until a remarkable discovery.
In 1970, there's a terrible fire that rages through the Church of St. Lazarus on the island of Cyprus. And as they're cleaning up, the authorities, the church authorities, discover that there's a sarcophagus that contains bones inside.
The marble sarcophagus is believed to date from the time of Jesus.
This is the tomb of St. Lazarus. Here you can see it in Greek, Phili Sou. It means the friend of Jesus.
Those words, friend of Jesus, that really clinched it for people here in Larnaca. They believe that they have the bones of St. Lazarus.
Today, the bones are preserved in a golden reliquary.
Here is a piece of the head of St. Lazarus.
So we've got 6 bones, maybe arms or leg bones, and a piece of skull?
Yes, what we found in 72.
The story that is told today is that the Cypriots only gave the emperor part of the body of Lazarus. In fact, parts of the skull of Lazarus is paraded on the island of Cyprus every feast day on March 17th. There's an unbroken continuity from that period to our time.
They are so highly venerated that the Orthodox authorities will not open the reliquary to allow inspection of the bones. But the Church of St. Lazarus Museum has a collection of material found with the relics in 1972.
It's a piece of the wooden box that the relics of St. Lazarus are kept in.
So maybe that's something that we could take a sample from.
The bishop releases a sample for testing.
Thank you very much, Your Grace. This piece of wood could help us unpack the mystery of what happened to Lazarus' bones. What's really exciting is if it goes all the way back to the 1st century and supports the story of Lazarus being buried right here in Larnaca.
Could this be the final resting place of the body of Lazarus? The time to test the legend has come. The Church of St. Lazarus on the island of Cyprus. Every year, Orthodox Christians venerate the bones believed to be those of Jesus' beloved friend Lazarus. But there is little in the Bible to support their tradition.
One of the problems is Lazarus only appears in the Gospel of John. He pops up out of nowhere, he's raised from the dead, and then he vanishes from the narrative.
And this really has to make you wonder, is this an historical event, or is this a legend that makes a theological point about the importance of resurrection in Christian theology?
The story of Lazarus that is given to us in the Gospel of John tells us much more about the person of Jesus than it does about Lazarus. This doesn't mean that Lazarus didn't exist.
But there is another theory, one that puts Lazarus at the heart of the Passion narrative.
There's this mysterious figure in John's Gospel, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Tradition identified him with John. Some people suggest it was Thomas. We really don't know who this character is, and there are lots of possibilities. Some even suggest that it was Lazarus that Jesus raised from the dead.
The disciple whom Jesus loved appears at the Last Supper.
One of you will betray me tonight.
Ask him. Which one he means.
Lord, who is it? Who will betray you?
The only person in that gospel about whom it is said, he is the one whom Jesus loved, is Lazarus.
The idea that Lazarus might be the beloved disciple is a bit wild, but it's not without merit. It helps explain a number of things. It helps us understand why this beloved disciple only appears at that point in the narrative. Well, it's after Lazarus was dead and resurrected.
Jesus is betrayed by Judas and condemned by Pilate.
The idea that Lazarus is the beloved disciple helps us understand a crucial piece of the Passion narrative. Why is the beloved disciple the only male disciple standing at the foot of the cross when all the others have fled? Perhaps it's because the beloved disciple understands that the cross is not the end. The beloved disciple has already experienced resurrection.
We're told that Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the beloved disciple are there together. And Jesus bequeaths his own mother as a sort of last will and testament to the beloved disciple, and we are told he took her into his own home.
I think it's wrong to find value in a story only if we can trace it back to something historical. This story in particular does really important work because it tells about something really profound, about love for one's friend, about the willingness to lay down your life for your friend's life, about hope in the face of despair and the transcendence of death.
In Oxford, England, George Kazan and Tom Hyam are about to put the evidence to the test.
I was lucky enough to meet the Bishop of Larnaca, and he gave me a small piece of wood that was found in the sarcophagus said to be that of Lazarus.
The wood was alongside bones believed to be those of Lazarus.
This wood belongs to a juniper tree. And we know that juniper is found on Cyprus and was used for the coffins of people in the early and late Roman periods. We're hoping the radiocarbon date will tell us more.
The results of the Lazarus wood are about to come off. It's coming out at quite modern in the last 200 to 300 years.
So this can't possibly be from the coffin of Lazarus himself?
No, definitely not.
And it's more likely to be something from when this crypt was disturbed. So it doesn't take us any closer to discovering whether or not Lazarus actually came to Larnaca or whether he was buried there. And
Until the bones themselves are tested, science cannot prove their age. But the tradition that Lazarus was buried beneath this church and the veneration of his relics continues on Cyprus.
The relics of Lazarus is a testimony to the teachings of Jesus Christ. When Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, the idea here is that an actual person is experiencing a supernatural phenomenon, and that relic is a symbol of that miracle.
Ultimately, it's a mystery why Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. It may be to show his power, but I think more likely it's because he loved Lazarus and loved Mary and Martha so much that he wanted to restore their brother to life. So I think it's less an act of showing his power and more an act of showing his love.